had observed 347 species in his career as a diplomatic recorder for the Galactic Coalition. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched young civilizations make their first nervous steps into the wider cosmos. He had documented countless negotiations, treaties, and surrenders, but he had never seen anything quite like the humans. The Coalition Council chamber floated in neutral space, a massive orbital station built from crystalline materials that caught and reflected the light of nearby stars. Inside the Grand Hall, representatives from 70 species sat in tiered rows, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some breathed methane, others oxygen. Some had scales, others had skin, and a few had no solid form at all. But they all shared one thing: they had learned to follow the rules of galactic civilization. The humans arrived in 3 small ships, noted this in his report. Their vessels were metal, crude compared to the energy-based constructs of the elder races. They looked functional, built for purpose rather than beauty. No artistic curves, no displays of wealth or power, just machines designed to move through space. When the human delegation entered the chamber, studied them carefully. They walked on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and possessed binocular vision. Standard predator configuration, he noted. Their faces showed remarkable expressiveness, muscles moving beneath their skin to convey emotion. The lead delegate was a female named. She wore simple dark clothing with no ornamentation. Behind her walked a male called, his face marked with old scars that suggested prior violence. The council leader, a mother's voice from the Harmony, began the session with traditional greetings. The humans responded politely. Then came the reason for this meeting. The Empire has submitted a territorial claim, the council leader announced. Your colony on the world you call 442b sits within their claimed expansion zone. They demand you withdraw your presence within 3 standard cycles. The chamber fell silent. Every species present knew what this meant. They were old, powerful, and violent. They had conquered 40 star systems through military force. When the maid demands younger species, it was the way of things. Stood quietly for a moment, then she spoke in clear, measured tones. We respectfully decline. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Several translators requested confirmation, thinking they had made an error. Felt his antenna twitch with interest. This was unusual. The ambassador rose from his position. He was massive, covered in dark scales with teeth designed to tear flesh. You decline. His voice carried a hissing quality that his translator rendered as contempt. You are a new species. You have 12 ships, we have hundreds. You have 1 small colony, we have 40 worlds. You cannot decline. Met his gaze without flinching. Noted this. Most species found intimidating. Their size, their teeth, their reputation for violence, all of it worked to make others back down, but simply looked at the ambassador as if he were stating weather conditions. We have 50,000 people living on that world, she said. They've built homes, they've planted crops, children have been born there. It's our world now, and we don't abandon our people. Ever. The ambassador laughed. It was a harsh, cruel sound. Then those people will die, and you will learn what happens to species who challenge the... Stepped forward then, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet but somehow filled the chamber. We've been learning how to die for a very long time. What we've never learned is how to give up. The council leader intervened, calling for calm. She addressed the humans with what recognized as carefully measured patience, the tone one uses with children who don't understand danger. Please consider carefully. The military is vast. Your forces are minimal. This conflict would be brief and costly. The coalition recommends negotiated withdrawal. We can help relocate your colonists. There is no shame in choosing survival over pointless resistance. Shook her head slowly. You don't understand. It's not about shame. It's not about pride. Our people asked for protection. They trusted us to keep them safe. We made a promise. Humans keep their promises. Even if keeping that promise means death, the council leader asked gently. Especially then, replied. The session continued for another hour, but the outcome was clear. The humans would not withdraw. The coalition members spoke among themselves in low voices, their tone a mixture of pity and frustration. Heard someone call the humans noble but doomed. Another called them too young to understand reality. The ambassador delivered a final statement: 3 cycles. Then we take what is ours. Your colony will burn, your people will die, and the galaxy will forget you ever existed. Responded simply, come and try. As the session ended, made a decision. He approached the council leader and requested assignment as an official observer to document the coming conflict. She granted it immediately. Everyone assumed this would be brief, a lesson in why young species should listen to their elders, would write about another civilization learning humility the hard way. He followed the human delegation back to their docking bay. They walked in silence, these strange bipeds who had just chosen death over surrender, kept his distance but stayed close enough to hear them speak among themselves. Spoke to in a low voice. They have no idea what we survived to get here. Glanced at him, her face showing something couldn't quite identify. Sadness, determination, both. Then I suppose we'll have to educate them, she said. They boarded their simple metal ships and departed. Watched them go, already composing the opening lines of his report in his mind. He had 3 cycles to reach the human colony before they arrived. 3 cycles to position himself to document what everyone assumed would be a quick and brutal defeat. He had documented many defeats before. They all followed similar patterns. First came the denial, then the desperate resistance, then the inevitable surrender. Young species always believed they were special, that their determination would somehow matter against superior force. Then reality taught them otherwise. Began his journey to 442b, confident he knew exactly how this story would end. He was wrong, but he wouldn't realize that until he watched humans charge into impossible odds with nothing but fury and refusal in their hearts. The galaxy was about to learn something new, and would be there to document every terrifying moment. The fleet arrived exactly 3 cycles later, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect military formation. Watched from his observation post on the surface of 442b, his recording equipment capturing everything. 80 warships appeared in the planet's orbital space, their hulls dark and menacing against the stars. Each ship was larger than anything humanity possessed. Each carried enough firepower to level a city. The human fleet numbered 12 ships, had already calculated the outcome. By every military standard the coalition used, this battle should last less than 6 hours. He prepared his equipment to document the evacuation and surrender negotiations. He had seen this pattern many times before. What he saw instead changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human military commander was named Sung. He was older than most human soldiers, with burned scars covering the left side of his face and neck. When asked about the injury, Sung simply said it was from before we reached the stars. He didn't elaborate. The colonel moved through the command center with calm efficiency, issuing orders in short, clear sentences. But his strategy made no sense too. Instead of forming a defensive line in orbit, the human ships scattered. They hid in asteroid fields behind the planet's 3 small moons in the shadow of orbital platforms. When they advanced, the humans didn't engage them directly. They struck from hiding, fired their weapons, then retreated before they could respond. This is not proper combat, observed to Sung. By coalition standards, you should form battle lines and engage the enemy with honor. Sung looked at him with eyes that held no humor. We don't fight with honor, we fight to win. There's a difference. The first squadron entered low orbit, moving toward the planet's surface in confident formation. They expected the humans to either surrender or meet them in open battle. Instead, a single human ship piloted by Lieutenant flew straight at the flagship. Watched in confusion as the small vessel accelerated to maximum speed, ignoring all weapons fire directed at it. Then he realized what was happening. The ship was packed with explosives, wasn't attacking, she was becoming a weapon. The impact destroyed the flagship and crippled 3 destroyers nearby. Felt his breathing passages constrict with shock. Suicide attacks were forbidden by every galactic convention. The waste of sentient life was considered barbaric, a violation of core principles that all civilized species followed. But humans, apparently, didn't consider themselves bound by rules they'd never agreed to follow. "Did she die?" asked, his voice barely functioning. Sung checked his display. "No, she ejected 2 seconds before impact. Recovery teams are picking her up now. She'll probably lose both legs from the acceleration injuries, but she'll live." And if she hadn't ejected in time? Sung's expression didn't change. Then we'd remember her name and continue fighting. Over the next 12 hours, 4 more human pilots made similar attacks. 2 survived. 2 didn't. The fleet, confused and demoralized by these tactics, pulled back to regroup. They'd expected conventional warfare. They'd never faced an enemy willing to turn their own bodies into weapons. But they were numerous and determined. They sent 15,000 shock troops to the planet's surface, deploying in traditional military formations with heavy armor and powerful weapons. The humans had 3,000 defenders, accompanied a unit led by Captain, embedding himself as a neutral observer. They advanced across the open terrain outside the human colony, their shields shimmering, their weapons ready. They moved in perfect disciplined lines, exactly as coalition military doctrine prescribed. It was textbook assault strategy. The humans didn't fight them in the open. Forces had fortified the colony itself, turning every building into a fortress, every street into a kill zone. When they entered the city, they found nothing, empty streets, silent buildings. Then the attacks began. Explosives hidden underground detonated beneath formations. Human soldiers fired from windows and disappeared before return fire could find them. Snipers struck from impossible angles, killing officers and communication specialists. Had divided his forces into small teams of 5 or 6 soldiers each. They moved through tunnels, attacked from unexpected directions, and vanished before the enemy could organize a response. Followed Sergeant's squad into a ruined commercial district. She was young for a sergeant, but her squad moved with practiced coordination. They took position in a collapsed basement, completely silent, for 6 hours. Watched them wait with inhuman patience. When a platoon finally passed overhead, triggered a series of buried explosives. The street collapsed. 37 soldiers fell into a prepared kill zone where squad picked them off with precise weapons fire. The entire engagement lasted 90 seconds. Then the humans disappeared through prepared escape tunnels. "Why do you fight this way?" asked as they moved through the darkness. "Why not face your enemy directly with honor?" Paused, her face illuminated by the dim light of her equipment. "My grandparents fought in wars on Earth. They told me stories. They taught me that honor is for people who can afford it. We can't afford it, so we fight smart instead." By the end of the first day, they had lost 4,000 soldiers. They controlled no part of the city. Their advance had stalled completely, documented everything with growing unease. This wasn't how warfare worked. The smaller force was supposed to lose. That was the natural order of things. That evening, found in the command bunker, the captain was reviewing tactical maps, planning the next day's operations. His face showed exhaustion, but his hands were steady. "I don't understand," admitted. "Your people are dying. Your city is being destroyed. Why continue? Why not negotiate surrender while you still have something to bargain with?" Looked up from his maps. His eyes were strange, not angry, not afraid, just empty. "You want to know what makes us different? Every species you've met learned to be civilized first, then went to space. We did it backwards. We spent 10,000 years killing each other on Earth. We had wars that lasted generations. We built weapons that could destroy our whole planet. We learned every possible way to hurt, kill, and terrify each other. Then we finally got tired of fighting ourselves and decided to fight the universe instead. He gestured at the maps. This isn't special for us. This is just Tuesday. We brought every lesson we learned from 10,000 years of warfare. We know how to fight when we're outnumbered. We know how to fight when we know how to turn cities into graveyards and streets into nightmares. And most importantly, we know how to keep fighting long after any sane species would quit. But at what cost? Asked. Smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Whatever it takes. That night, they tried to break human morale by bombing civilian shelters. They killed 2,000 colonists, including children, expected this to finally force a surrender. What civilization continues fighting after losing its children? Instead, the next morning, he watched human soldiers march out with expressions of cold rage. Sung addressed them briefly. Return the favor. That night, human commandos infiltrated the command ship. A team led by Lieutenant moved through the vessel in complete silence, killing 43 officers in their sleep. They didn't sabotage systems. They didn't steal intelligence. They simply murdered the enemy leadership and left. When they woke to find their commanders dead with throats cut, terror spread through their ranks. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. This was something older, darker, more primal. Recorded it all, his certainty about the universe's order crumbling with each observation. The humans were losing, casualties mounting, resources depleting, infrastructure destroyed. But they kept fighting. They kept killing. They kept refusing to acknowledge that they'd already lost. On the 7th day of the siege, as watched the squad ambush another patrol, he realized something that made his exoskeleton feel cold. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make victory too expensive for them to afford. And it was working. The siege entered its 4th week and watched the human colony transform into something he had no words for. The surface structures were mostly rubble now. Orbital bombardment had destroyed everything above ground. But beneath the ruins, the humans continued their resistance from a maze of tunnels and bunkers. The casualties were catastrophic. 7,000 human soldiers were dead or too wounded to fight. 8,000 civilians had been killed. Medical supplies had run out 6 days ago. Food was severely rationed. The colony's power generation was failing. By every logical measure, this was a defeated population. Yet they refused to surrender. Spent time in the civilian shelters, trying to understand. He found engineer working in a makeshift factory carved into the rock. The man hadn't slept in 40 hours, operating on chemical stimulants that humans called caffeine, and something they refused to explain to him. And 200 other civilians were manufacturing ammunition from scavenged materials. How long can you continue this? Asked. Looked at him with bloodshot eyes. As long as necessary. That's not an answer. It's the only answer we have. In another section, Met. She had been a teacher before the invasion. Now she operated a weapons assembly line, her hands moving with mechanical precision despite obvious exhaustion. Children cried in the background. The elderly were dying from lack of medicine. The air tasted of recycled breath and desperation. Why? Asked her. Why put yourselves through this? Didn't stop working as she answered. My great-grandmother survived a war on Earth. Her city was bombed flat. She ate food made from sawdust to survive. She told me stories when I was young. She said humans have this thing inside us. When you push us past our limits, we don't break. We just find new limits. Observed something during these weeks that contradicted his understanding of biology. Humans appeared to function well beyond what should be physiological shutdown. He watched soldiers fight for 30 hours straight without rest. He saw wounded humans drag themselves back to firing positions with broken bones. He documented people working until they collapsed, then waking up and immediately resuming work. Medical officer Jinnah explained it to him in her makeshift clinic, surrounded by wounded soldiers. Our bodies produce a chemical called adrenaline when we're in danger. It overrides pain signals, increases strength, sharpens focus. We can push ourselves to do things that should be impossible. She gestured around the clinic. The problem is, eventually your body demands payment for that borrowed strength. We're all borrowing now. We'll all pay later. If you survive, added. Yes, if we survive. The commander, growing desperate as his easy conquest turned into a meat grinder, ordered systematic destruction of civilian areas. He believed this would finally break human morale. Instead, it ignited something had never seen before. Not fear, not despair, but pure rage channeled into cold efficiency. Colonel Sung called his remaining officers together, attended the meeting. Sung didn't give speeches about honor or duty. He simply showed them footage of the dead civilians, including dozens of children. Then he spoke 3 words: return the favor. The attacks that followed weren't military operations, they were executions. Human special forces teams infiltrated positions with the sole purpose of killing, not disrupting operations, not gathering intelligence, just killing. Lieutenant led these missions. Interviewed him after one raid that had killed 23 soldiers. His face showed no emotion, no satisfaction, no remorse. Do you enjoy this? Asked. No. Then why do it? Because they killed our children. Because if we let that go unanswered, more children will die. Because the only language they understand is violence, so we're teaching them a lesson in their own language. This isn't warfare, this is murder. Look directly at. You're right, war has rules, this isn't war anymore, this is survival, and in survival there are no rules. The psychological impact on the forces was severe. They began sleeping in shifts, weapons always ready. They refused to patrol alone. Officers demanded additional guards. The humans, outnumbered 10-1, had somehow made the larger force afraid. Ambassador remained on the planet throughout the siege. She could have evacuated to the fleet, but she chose to stay with the colonists. Found her in a deep bunker, coordinating with Fleet Commander in orbit and managing civilian morale on the ground. Your species confuses me, admitted to her. You're clearly intelligent. You understand mathematics, science, logic. Yet you make the illogical choice to continue fighting when fighting cannot lead to victory. Was quiet for a moment, reviewing reports on her display. Then she looked up at him. Let me tell you about Earth. Our planet went through ice ages, periods where glaciers covered entire continents. The temperature dropped so low that most species died, but humans survived. We walked across frozen continents on foot, hunting animals in blizzards, living in conditions that should have killed us. We survived because we're persistent hunters. We don't give up, ever. She pulled up images on her display, historical records from Earth. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We rebuilt after wars that destroyed entire civilizations. We've been knocked down more times than any species should be able to handle, but we always got back up. It's not in our DNA to quit. We literally evolved to be stubborn. But surely there's a limit, argued. Surely there's a point where continued resistance becomes pointless self-destruction. Smiled sadly. You'd think so, wouldn't you? But that limit doesn't exist for us. We don't have a surrender instinct. When other species hit their breaking point, something in their biology tells them to submit. Humans don't have that. When we hit what should be our breaking point, something else activates. We get angry, and angry humans are dangerous humans. That night, Captain was hit by artillery fire, was nearby and saw the explosion. Both of his legs were destroyed below the knee. The medics wanted to evacuate him, but he refused. They rigged a mobile gurney for him, and he continued directing artillery from the disabled gun positions in the city ruins. Watched this legless human manually calculate firing solutions using paper and mathematics, adjusting trajectories with compass and protractor like some ancient siege engineer. It was inefficient, slow, and painful, but kept working. Why? Asked him. You've done enough, you could rest. looked up from his calculations, his face pale from blood loss and pain. My soldiers are still fighting. How can I rest while they fight? You have no legs. I have my hands. I have my brain, that's enough. Hours later, successfully dropped an artillery shell directly on the command position, killing their ground force commander. Then he closed his eyes and died, still holding his compass. Documented all of this. He recorded the impossible endurance, the refusal to acknowledge defeat, the transformation of ordinary people into something harder and more terrible than any military force. He tried to remain objective, to simply observe and report, but something inside him was changing. On day 33 of the siege, as he watched 12-year-old children learning to load weapons in the civilian shelters, realized he wasn't documenting a defeat. He was documenting something the galaxy had never seen before. He was watching a species that simply would not stop, and he finally understood what it meant about humans having no surrender instinct. They would keep fighting until either their enemy left or every single human was dead. There was no third option. The galaxy needed to know about this, but wasn't sure they would believe him. Day 47 of the siege dawned with red light filtering through the smoke and dust that now permanently covered 442B. Stood in the command bunker, watching the final act of what everyone assumed would be humanity's defeat. The Empire had committed everything to one massive assault. Every warship bombarded the planet simultaneously. Every ground soldier prepared to advance in a single, overwhelming wave. The coalition had sent urgent diplomatic messages to the humans, begging them to surrender before complete annihilation. Even species that had no love for the urged humanity to accept defeat gracefully. The humans ignored every message. Ran the calculations himself. The numbers were impossible. Fewer than 1,000 human soldiers remained combat-ready. They faced 8,000 ground troops backed by complete orbital dominance. The command structure had collapsed. Colonel Sung was dead, killed by artillery 3 hours earlier. Captain was gone. Most officers were either dead or too wounded to lead. Ambassador took command. She was a diplomat, not a military commander, but she was all they had left. Watched her move through the bunker, speaking quietly with soldiers, checking weapon supplies, reviewing what remained of their tactical options. She opened a communication channel to Fleet Commander, who had kept 5 human ships alive through guerrilla tactics in the outer system. The transmission was poor, crackling with static, but heard every word. We're going to charge them. A pause, then's voice, I know. All in, everything we have left. Understood, we'll make our own charge up here. It's been an honor. The honor is ours, Ambassador, give them hell. Felt something close to panic. This is insanity. A frontal assault against superior numbers and firepower violates every principle of tactics. You'll all die in minutes. Turned to look at him. Her face was dirty, exhausted, marked with cuts and bruises, but her eyes were clear. You're right. This is insane. It's also the only winning move we have left. She explained the plan and felt his understanding of warfare shatter completely. The humans weren't charging because they'd gone mad with desperation. They were charging because they'd calculated it was their only chance. They expected the humans to defend their underground positions, to make the enemy dig them out bunker by bunker. Instead, the remaining 800 soldiers would emerge from the ruins and form a battle line in the open. No cover, no fortifications. They would stand and wait for the army to reach them. Above, every human ship still capable of flight would dive into the atmosphere, targeting not the ground forces but their orbital support vessels. It was a trade, the entire human fleet for the fleet, a 5-for-1 exchange that would leave no human ships operational. You're sacrificing your fleet, said. We're buying our ground forces 30 minutes without orbital bombardment, corrected. That's all they need. Lieutenant, recovered from her earlier kamikaze run but now badly burned and missing one arm, would lead the aerospace assault. Watched her climb into her fighter cockpit with help from ground crew. She saw him watching and called out, "Tell them we fought well." Then she launched, followed by every remaining human craft capable of flight. 32 ships total, rising into orbit to face 80 warships. On the ground, the soldiers emerged from the tunnels. Went with them, his recording equipment capturing everything. They formed a line along the colony's edge, standing in the open as the army advanced from the opposite side of the ruined city. 8,000 enemies against 800 defenders. Sergeant stood nearby, her rifle held ready. Her uniform was torn and blood-stained. She'd been fighting for 47 days straight. By all rights, she should barely be able to stand. Instead, she checked her weapon and smiled. "First time I've seen open ground in weeks," she said to no one in particular. "Almost forgot what the sky looks like." They began their advance, moving in perfect military formation. Their shields shimmered in the dusty air. Their weapons hummed with ready energy. They outnumbered the humans 10-1. They had better armor, better weapons, better position. This should be a slaughter. Above, the human ships made their final dives. Saw them on his display, tiny metal vessels accelerating to maximum speed, targeting the massive warships. The pilots didn't try to fight. They didn't engage in dogfights or tactical maneuvers. They simply aimed their ships at the enemy and flew straight into them. The explosions lit up the sky. One by one, human ships transformed into meteors, crashing into vessels. Some hit their targets, some missed, some were destroyed before impact. But they kept coming, wave after wave of humans choosing collision over survival. Ship was the last. She flew directly at the command carrier, her damaged fighter screaming through weapons fire that should have destroyed her. At the last second, she adjusted her angle and hit the carrier's main reactor. The explosion was visible from the ground, a second sun blooming in orbit. The orbital bombardment stopped. The fleet was crippled or destroyed. The human fleet was gone completely. No survivors, every pilot dead. But the ground forces had their 30 minutes. Raised her arm, then dropped it in a chopping motion. Forward. The human line began to move. Not running, not charging yet, just walking forward with weapons ready. They didn't shout battle cries or make threats. They simply advanced in eerie silence. They opened fire at maximum range. Energy weapons cut through the air. Explosives detonated among the human ranks. Soldiers fell, dozens of them in the first seconds. The line didn't stop, didn't slow. The humans just kept walking forward, stepping over their own dead. 500 meters separated the armies, then 400, then 300. The humans started running, not a panicked run but a measured tactical advance, still silent, still organized. At 200 meters, they began to scream. Had never heard sounds like this. The humans weren't shouting words or threats. They were producing raw, primal noise, war cries that came from some ancient part of their brain. He later learned these cries were in dozens of different languages, from dozens of different cultures, echoing thousands of years of human warfare. The psychological impact was immediate. The formation wavered. They'd been fighting a desperate, cornered enemy. Now they faced something that looked like it had already accepted death and decided to take everyone else with it. The two forces collided. What followed wasn't combat, it was savagery. Humans used rifles until ammunition ran out, then switched to knives. When knives broke, they used rocks. When they had no weapons at all, they used fists and teeth. Watched Sergeant kill 4 soldiers with her bare hands before a plasma bolt finally brought her down. She was smiling when she died. Fought in the front line, a diplomat wielding a military rifle like she'd been trained for this her entire life. She fired until her weapon overheated, then picked up a fallen soldier's gun and continued. Medical officer Jinnah fought with a pistol in one hand and a medical kit in the other. killing enemies and treating wounded humans in the same chaotic minutes. Engineer, who'd spent weeks manufacturing ammunition, charged with nothing but a mining tool. He died bringing down 2 soldiers. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, 143 humans were still standing. The army was broken, 5,000 dead, the rest fleeing in complete disorder. They couldn't comprehend what they'd witnessed. They couldn't understand how a defeated enemy had somehow won. Stood among the dead, his recording equipment still running. Bodies covered the ground, human and mixed together in death. The silence after the fighting was absolute. Collapsed, bleeding from multiple wounds. Medics rushed to her. She pushed them away long enough to look at. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "Tell your coalition," she said. "Tell them what you saw here. Tell them we buried our dead and we rebuilt. Tell them if anyone else wants to test us." She coughed blood but kept talking. "We'll do this again." Then she passed out. Looked around at the aftermath. 143 humans had defeated 8,000 through nothing but refusal to accept defeat. They'd paid a terrible price, but they'd won. He finally understood what made humans dangerous. They didn't fight to win. They fought until their enemy broke. And in a universe where every other species had a breaking point, that made humans unstoppable. 6 cycles later, stood once again in the Coalition Council chamber. But this time, he wasn't a passive observer. He was the primary witness to something the galaxy had never seen before. The chamber was packed. Representatives from every coalition species attended, along with military advisors, strategic analysts, and diplomatic observers. The ambassador sat in his position, his posture rigid with barely controlled rage. News of their defeat had spread through known space, and everyone wanted answers. The council leader called the session to order. "Observer, you were embedded with human forces during the 442B conflict. Please present your findings." Activated his display. Images filled the chamber, the siege, the battles, the charge. He saw several representatives physically recoil at the footage of humans ramming their ships into vessels, of soldiers charging into impossible odds. "The conflict lasted 47 standard days," began, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. "Human casualties totaled 15,267, civilian and military combined. The Empire committed 80 warships and 15,000 ground troops. At the conflict's end, the fleet was completely destroyed. Their ground forces suffered 73% casualties and rooted in disarray." Murmurs filled the chamber. The ambassador stood. "Lies, the military does not retreat." "I have complete documentation," replied calmly. "Visual, audio, and tactical records. Your forces fled after being broken by a numerically inferior enemy. This is fact." The council leader gestured for silence. "Continue, observer." Took a moment to organize his thoughts. How could he explain what he'd witnessed? How could he make them understand? "The coalition operates on certain assumptions about warfare," he said. "We assume that superior numbers and technology determine outcomes. We assume that logical species surrender when defeat becomes inevitable. We assume that there's a breaking point where continued resistance becomes irrational. These assumptions are based on observing hundreds of species over thousands of cycles." He paused. "Humans invalidate every single one of these assumptions." The display changed, showing biological data. Humans evolved on what they call their planet has extreme weather, dangerous predators, and limited resources. They spent 300,000 years in constant struggle for survival. Their biology reflects this. They possess enhanced endurance, the ability to operate under extreme stress, and a stress response they call adrenaline that allows temporary superhuman performance. More images appeared, historical records from Earth. But biology alone doesn't explain what I witnessed. Their psychology is what makes them truly different. Humans evolved as persistence hunters. They didn't chase prey by being faster or stronger. They chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. This hunting method became part of their core identity. Humans don't stop. It's not a choice, it's fundamental to who they are. A representative from the Harmony spoke up. But surely there's a limit. Surely they recognize when continued fighting is pointless. Shook his head. That's what I believed. I was wrong. Humans have an unusual psychological trait. They can override their survival instincts with abstract concepts. Loyalty, duty, revenge, pride. They'll die for ideas. They'll endure horrific suffering for principles. And when pushed to their absolute limit, instead of surrendering, they become angry. Angry humans don't think clearly, but they fight harder. The ambassador spoke again, his voice filled with contempt. They fight without honor, like animals. This is not civilization. You're correct, agreed, surprising the chamber. They don't fight like civilized species. They fight like survivors. And that's precisely the problem. Every species in this chamber learned to be civilized before reaching space. Humans did it backwards. They spent 10,000 years fighting each other with ever-increasing brutality. They have detailed historical records of their wars, conflicts that lasted generations, weapons that could destroy their entire planet, tactics specifically designed to inflict psychological terror. He pulled up human military history, images of ancient battles, medieval sieges, modern warfare. They learned warfare from each other, which means they learned to fight without the honor codes that limit galactic conflict. They learned asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, psychological operations, and total war. They brought all these lessons to space. The council leader leaned forward. Are you suggesting they're a threat to coalition security? I'm suggesting we need to reconsider our entire approach to humanity. Change the display again, showing the final charge. Watch this carefully. This is the moment when 800 humans defeated 8,000 soldiers. The chamber fell silent as the footage played, provided narration. They knew this was likely their last stand. They knew the odds. They charged anyway, not because they were irrational, but because they'd calculated it was their only remaining tactical option. They sacrificed their entire fleet to create a 30-minute window. Then they charged into close combat, where their willingness to die gave them an advantage over an enemy that still wanted to live. He let the footage play out, the collision of forces, the brutal hand-to-hand fighting, the line breaking and fleeing. The forces couldn't comprehend what they were facing. How do you defeat an enemy that treats death as an acceptable outcome? The ambassador slammed his appendage on his platform. This proves they're dangerous. They should be contained, restricted. They're too violent for civilized space. Several other representatives murmured agreement, had expected this reaction. He raised his appendage for attention. Military containment will fail, he stated clearly. I say this not as opinion but as analysis. Humans are currently 1 century behind us in technology, yet they defeated a force with superior numbers and equipment. In 10 cycles, they'll match our technology. In 20 cycles, they'll likely surpass it. If you try to contain them militarily, you'll turn them into enemies. And I've seen what humans do to their enemies. Then what do you suggest? The council leader asked. Displayed his final recommendation. Make them allies, immediately. Offer full coalition membership with equal status. Military cooperation agreements, technology exchanges, complete diplomatic recognition. The chamber erupted in protests. Multiple species spoke at once, arguing that this rewarded violence, encouraged other young species to rebel, undermined coalition authority. Waited for silence, then spoke again. You're thinking about this wrong. This isn't a reward, this is survival. Humans don't want to conquer the galaxy. They want to be left alone to build their colonies and live their lives. But if you threaten them, if you try to limit them, they'll fight. And they'll win, eventually. The cost might be terrible for them and for us, but they'll win because they simply will not stop. He pulled up one final image, ambassador standing in the ruins of the colony surrounded by dead. This woman told me something during the siege. She said humans survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that destroyed entire civilizations. They rebuilt every time. It's in their DNA to persist. When you're deciding how to handle humanity, remember this. They're not asking for permission to exist. They're informing you that they're here to stay. The council debated for 6 hours. Representatives argued passionately on both sides. Some wanted military action. Some wanted diplomatic isolation. Some wanted to study humans further before deciding. Finally, they voted. By a narrow margin, they agreed to this recommendation. Humanity would receive full coalition membership, not because they'd earned it through cultural achievement or technological advancement, because they'd earned it through fear. After the session, added a final note to his official report. It would be sealed in the coalition archives, available only to future historians. I watched humans charge into war, he wrote. I saw them refuse to surrender when surrender was logical. I saw them endure suffering that should have broken them. I saw them die by the thousands for abstract concepts like loyalty and home. I finally understand why the entire cosmos should fear them. Not because they're the strongest because they possess something that might be unique in the galaxy, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. They are persistence made flesh. They are endurance given consciousness. They are what happens when evolution doesn't grant a species claws or armor or natural weapons, so it grants them something more dangerous, the inability to quit. 10 cycles later, humanity had indeed become a central coalition power. Ambassador sat on the High Council. Fleet commander trained coalition forces in human tactical doctrine. Human colonies spread to 15 worlds. And on 442b, now rebuilt, stood a memorial. 7,287 names carved in stone, every human who died in the siege. At the base, one inscription. They came for our home. We taught them why Earth sent us to the stars. Visited the memorial once, during a diplomatic mission. He found a young human child placing flowers at the base. She couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old. Did you know someone who died here? Asked gently. The child shook her head. No, but my teacher says we remember them so we know what humans do when you push us. We survive, we fight, we win. Looked at the names carved in stone, at the child who would grow up knowing these stories, at the colony that had been destroyed and rebuilt. He thought about the galaxy's reaction to humanity, the fear, the respect, the careful diplomacy that now characterized every interaction with these strange, stubborn bipeds. He finally understood completely. The cosmos didn't fear humans because of what they could do. The cosmos feared them because of what they wouldn't do. They wouldn't surrender. They wouldn't quit. They wouldn't accept limits imposed by others. In a universe where every other species knew when to stop, humans were the ones who didn't. And that made them the most dangerous force in the galaxy, not because they wanted to conquer, but because they simply refused to lose. Left the memorial and returned to his ship. He had other assignments waiting, other species to observe, other conflicts to document. But he knew that nothing he saw in the future would compare to what he'd witnessed on 442b. He'd seen humans charge into war, and now the entire cosmos knew to fear them.